Imagine a viral video creator, like agonizing over a 3-second hook, doing absolutely everything mathematically possible to hijack your attention.
Right, trying to hack those fractions of a second on a screen.
Exactly. But now, picture a spiritual teacher sitting in total undisturbed silence, doing the exact opposite just to capture his own attention.
It's basically a complete contradiction,
It
right?
really is. But what if I told you that the hyper-distracted algorithms of the modern internet and, the ancient pursuit of spiritual enlightenment, what if they're actually exploiting the exact same glitch in the human brain?
I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking a pretty wild mix of sources today.
Yeah, a really fascinating stack.
We've got a 2026 data report from Opus Clip analyzing the absolute best video hooks in the coaching and self-improvement space. But we are layering that hard data against Eckhart Tolle's foundational teachings from his book, The Power of Now.
And we also have some really brilliant, nuanced insights translated from Urdu and Hindi summaries of his work, which adds so much depth.
Oh, for sure. Plus, we're looking at a short story about a restless overthinker named David and a truly stunning Urdu poem by Haider Jazdan titled Lamha, which translates to the moment.
So on the surface, these sources seem completely unrelated, but they all circle around this central defining mechanism of human consciousness.
Yeah.
Because before we can even talk about calming the mind, we have to look at how the mind gets captured in the first place, especially when it's running on pure autopilot.
Right. So let's jump straight into the algorithmic side of this. I was looking at the Opus Clip report, and I mean, the sheer scale of the analysis is wild.
Oh, it's massive.
The AI analyzed over 333,000 short-form video clips, specifically in the coaching and self-improvement genre. You would think the ways to grab someone's attention are just endless.
You would think so, but the data reveals the exact opposite. Human attention is actually incredibly predictable. Out of those hundreds of thousands of clips, 86% of the successful hooks fall into just 3 really specific categories.
Yeah, and number 3 on that list, making up over 54,000 successful clips, is the problem-solution setup.
Which makes sense. It's a classic format.
Definitely. And then number 2, with over 102,000 clips, is direct address or intrigue.
Like asking the viewer a direct question.
Exactly. But the absolute undisputed king of capturing human attention, appearing in nearly 129,000 viral clips, is the shock or surprise hook.
But we need to define what shock actually means in this specific context, right? Because it is not about loud noises or, like, jump scares.
No, it's cognitive.
Exactly. It's a cognitive shock.
The report actually highlights some great real-world examples of this. One creator starts a video by flatly stating, "Poverty ain't nothing. Poverty is a state of mind. It's a lack of mental resources."
Right. Yeah.
And another hook goes, "You can't be a kind person if you don't use kind words. What you say is who you are." So here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm ready.
Are these shock surprise hooks essentially functioning as a mental tripwire?
A mental tripwire. I like that.
Yeah, like it feels like they only work because they momentarily short-circuit our brain's default settings. We expect a certain polite narrative, and the creator abruptly breaks it.
That underlying neurological mechanism is really the key to all of this. I mean, our brains are fundamentally incredibly efficient prediction machines.
Right, trying to guess what happens next.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, predicting what happens next saves valuable caloric energy. We are constantly anticipating the end of a sentence, the next note in a song, or the logical conclusion of a societal belief.
So when a video starts with a statement that aggressively contradicts a deeply held belief,
Yeah.
like telling someone poverty is just a state of mind, the prediction model basically just fails.
The brain literally stalls out. It experiences this flash of cognitive dissonance.
Oh, wow.
And in that fraction of a second, the autopilot is disabled, and you are thrust completely into the present moment.
Because you have to process the new data.
Right. The brain has to allocate conscious resources to figure out this unexpected new information. Now, genres like entertainment or comedy use shock too, but usually just for a quick laugh or dopamine hit.
Sure, like a punchline.
Exactly. But in the self-improvement space, this shock is intentionally designed to shatter a limiting belief.
But there is a catch, right? Because the Opus Clip data reveals a major limitation to this tactic. They call it pattern fatigue.
Oh, yeah. The human mind adapts with terrifying speed.
It really does. The report notes that top creators rotate between 3 or 4 different categories of hooks.
because if you try to shock the brain the exact same way every day, the brain just recognizes the pattern.
Right. It integrates it into its prediction model and stops reacting entirely.
The shock just becomes the new normal, and the mind goes right back to sleep. It really proves how desperate the human brain is to return to its comfortable, unconscious autopilot.
But what happens when that shock isn't engineered by a social media app? Like, what happens when a massive system rebooting tripwire is delivered by your own mind?
That's the real question.
Because that takes us away from creators desperately trying to hack attention directly into the origin story of Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, his experience is the ultimate extreme of this psychological mechanism.
So intense.
According to his biography, up until his late 20s, Tolle lived in a state of almost continuous, paralyzing anxiety.
And it was punctuated by periods of really deep suicidal depression,
Yeah.
right?
He lived with a huge burden of misery. And it culminated one night, shortly after his 29th birthday. He woke up with a feeling of absolute crushing dread.
He described the silence of his room, the distant noise of a passing train. Everything felt completely alien and hostile to him.
And in the middle of this intense suffering, a single thought kept repeating in his mind on a loop. He just kept thinking, I cannot live with myself any longer.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's the exact moment his brain short circuits, right?
It is. That sentence is the tripwire.
He looks at that thought, I cannot live with myself, and he realizes a massive logical flaw in the grammar of his own suffering. He thinks, am I one person or am I two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me. The I who is observing and the self that I cannot live with.
What's fascinating here is how this single realization completely dismantles the fundamental illusion of human suffering.
Yeah, because who is the I and who is the self being dragged around?
Exactly. Tolle realized in that fraction of a second that the unhappy, fearful self he was trying to escape wasn't his true identity at all.
It was just a complete fiction created by his mind.
Right, it was the ego.
And realizing that the self wasn't real provided such a massive cognitive shock that his mind literally just stopped. The internal monologue went completely silent.
He says he was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts.
He felt drawn into a vortex of energy, and he heard a voice inside his chest say, resist nothing. So he just let himself fall into that void.
And the result of that total surrender is what spiritual traditions call an awakening.
The way he describes the next morning is just incredible. He wakes up to the chirping of a bird outside his window, and he writes that if a precious diamond could make a sound, that is what it would be like.
It's such a beautiful image.
He saw the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains and knew, without even having to think about it, that the light was love itself.
He just walked around his room looking at ordinary things like a pencil, an empty bottle, marveling at the sheer aliveness of them.
Right. That ultimate shock surprise hook didn't just grab his attention for 30 seconds on an app.
No, it led to 5 months of uninterrupted, deep peace and bliss. He had escaped the trap of the mind entirely.
Which naturally leads us to a massive question. Once you are shocked out of that autopilot, you have to understand the mechanics of the trap you just escaped.
You have to know how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does the mind keep us so thoroughly distracted and miserable in the first place?
Well, Tolle's framework explains this by differentiating between clock time and psychological time.
Okay, clock time.
Clock time is practical and necessary. It is making an appointment for 3 p.m. or learning from a past mistake to avoid it tomorrow.
Planning a route to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Just the functional logistical reality of navigating the world.
Exactly. But psychological time is the trap. This happens when your mind is obsessively living in the past or projecting into the future.
Right.
Because the past is nothing more than a memory, right? It's just a neural trace left in the brain. And the future is pure imagination.
Neither actually exists in this exact moment.
Nope. All human suffering comes from resisting what is right now. We are just too busy comparing the present moment to a past we cannot change or a future we are completely terrified of.
And the Urdu and Hindi summaries of his work dive into a specific manifestation of this called the pain body.
Yes, the pain body.
And I have to admit, this concept really tripped me up at first. It sounds almost, I don't know, supernatural.
It can sound that way, yeah.
The summaries describe it as an accumulated field of emotional pain that lives inside us, built up from past traumas and grievances.
It really helps to view it not as a mystical entity, but as a deeply ingrained psychological reflex.
Okay, a reflex.
Yeah. When something in the present moment even slightly resembles a past hurt, maybe a tone of voice, a specific word, or a feeling of rejection, the pain body is triggered.
It wakes up.
It wakes up and begins to literally feed on your negative thoughts, generating more pain to sustain itself.
So wait, is the pain body basically like a malicious malware virus operating in the background of a computer?
Oh, I love that analogy.
Like it just sits there draining the battery, causing the system to overheat, making your internal voice say things like, I am a failure, or no one will ever love me.
Yes, and because we identify with that voice, we mistakenly believe we are the malware.
Exactly. It seems like the only way to fix it is to open the task manager, which in this case is pure awareness, and force quit the application just by observing it.
That is a perfect translation of the concept. Opening that mental task manager is exactly what Tolle means by becoming the observer. When you simply watch the pain body, when you mentally note, there's the anger rising, or there is the anxiety in my chest, you immediately sever the identification with it.
You separate yourself from it.
Right. The malware relies on you believing it is part of your core operating system. The moment you observe it as a separate program, it completely loses its power to control you.
And the sources offer a really profound example of how powerful this observational state can be.
Mm.
There's a story of a woman suffering from severe terminal cancer.
Right. This is a very powerful example.
For years, she fought the illness mentally. She was filled with anger, fear, and deep resentment about her diagnosis, which meant she was constantly feeding her pain body.
Her mind was locked in a state of absolute resistance against reality. She was caught in the "this shouldn't be happening to me" narrative.
Which is the ultimate form of psychological time.
Exactly.
But then she started practicing Tolle's concept of acceptance and surrender. She just stopped fighting the reality of the present moment.
She adopted that resist nothing mindset that Tolle experienced in his void.
And the incredible part is that while her physical illness obviously remained, her emotional suffering dissolved completely into a deep, profound silence.
You know, surrender is often so misunderstood as giving up or failing.
Right, like waving a white flag.
Yeah, but in this context, surrender simply means separating the physical, raw reality of the present moment from the mind's exhausting commentary about it.
Wow.
The cancer was the physical reality. The suffering was the mental commentary. By accepting what is, she yielded to the flow of life rather than fighting a battle she couldn't ever win.
But let's bring this down to earth for a minute, because it's very easy to talk about being the observer and practicing surrender when you are sitting quietly reading a book.
Right. It sounds great in theory.
But how do we actually practice this in the absolute chaos of daily life, with emails piling up and endless responsibilities?
Well, we can find a really good blueprint for that in the short story from our sources about the young man named David.
Oh, right, David. So he's 24 years old and an absolute chronic overthinker. His mind is basically a hurricane of regrets and anxieties.
He's miserable.
Yeah, he can't sleep, he's forgotten how to smile, and he's just desperate for relief. So he hikes up into the hills to visit a wise, retired psychologist.
And the old man assigns him a highly unusual task.
He does. He hands David a lit candle and tells him to walk a complete loop around the entire village at the foot of the hill.
And the only instruction is that he cannot let the flame go out.
Right, no matter how the wind blows or how difficult the terrain gets. So David takes this incredibly seriously. He shields the candle with his hands, focuses every ounce of his attention on the fragile light, and successfully completes the loop.
He comes back completely triumphant.
But the old man immediately asks him, "Did you see the colors of the sunset? Did you hear the birds? Did you notice the people in the village?"
And David has to admit he saw absolutely nothing.
He was staring at the candle the entire time. Now, I have to push back on that.
Okay, go for it.
Because when I read this, I thought it completely contradicted the entire philosophy of living in the moment.
How so?
Well, if David is so hyper-fixated on a literal piece of wax that he misses a beautiful sunset and the sounds of nature, isn't that just tunnel vision? How is ignoring the beauty of the world around you a path to enlightenment?
I see what you mean. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the crucial realization is that the candle was never the point.
It wasn't.
No, the candle was purely a set of training wheels for a mind that completely lacked discipline.
So because his attention was so fractured, he just needed a physical anchor.
Exactly. David's mind was completely untrained. It was being blown around by every single passing thought, just like the candle would be blown out by the wind.
Right, that makes sense.
The old man used the physical flame to force David's attention into a single, unbreakable point in the present moment. The lesson wasn't that he should spend the rest of his life ignoring the world to stare at string and wax.
Okay.
The lesson was that David needed to learn to guard his inner focus with that exact same fierce intensity.
Ah, I see. So once you build the mental muscle to stay in the present, you don't need the physical candle anymore. You take the training wheels off, and you apply that intense, quiet, protected focus to the actual sunset, the breeze, and the birds.
You bring the profound stillness of the protected flame into your observation of the entire world.
That is beautiful.
It is. And the Urdu summaries of Tolle's work actually outline 3 specific methods for bringing this inner focus into daily life. They refer to them beautifully as doorways to the unmanifested.
What are those 3 doorways?
Well, the first is silence.
Okay.
And this doesn't just mean turning off the television. It means actively creating an inner void without words. It's the practice of sitting quietly and shifting your attention away from your internal monologue to simply listen to the silence that exists underneath the ambient noise of a room.
Wow. And the second doorway mentioned is breath. And honestly, this makes perfect sense when you think about it neurologically.
It really does.
Because by paying deep conscious attention to the physical sensation of air entering and leaving your lungs, you anchor your consciousness directly into the physical present.
Right.
You literally cannot breathe in the past, and you cannot breathe in the future. The breath only exists right now.
Exactly. And the third doorway is perhaps the most challenging one. It is observing without naming.
Which means looking at a flower, or even just looking at your own hand, but deliberately stopping your brain from applying mental labels to it.
Right. You don't allow the thought, that is a red rose, or my skin looks dry.
You simply perceive the object purely as it is, just as raw, unfiltered visual data. It's like looking at the world before you ever learned language.
It forces the brain to experience reality rather than the brain's conceptualized idea of reality.
So we started this deep dive exploring how digital creators desperately try to capture human attention. And we've walked through how we can capture our own presence to find peace.
Yeah.
But our final source introduces a massive paradox. There is actually a profound danger in this very idea of capturing a moment.
Because there is a fundamental structural difference between experiencing the present moment and trying to possess it.
And this tension is gorgeously illustrated in the Urdu poem Lamha by Haider Jazdan. Lamha literally means the moment.
It's this wonderful poem.
I want to share some of the imagery from this because it's striking. He describes moments as matchsticks igniting, brief and brilliant.
Yeah.
He pictures a single droplet slowly separating from a scale. He explores moments of arrival and farewell, of vows being made and broken, and he compares the moment to a chameleon constantly changing colors.
Every single image he uses there highlights the fleeting, uncontrollable, and highly transient nature of time.
Right. But the real emotional gut punch comes at the end of the poem. The narrator witnesses all these beautiful transient moments and says, "Oh, these moments wish that I could imprison them like a magnet, not to move nor to meet, just to be mine, for now and forever."
It's powerful.
So what does this all mean when we bring it back to the mind?
Well, that final stanza is the ultimate tragic trap of the human ego. The ego experiences a beautiful moment, a perfect sunset, a deep connection with a friend, and its immediate instinct is to freeze it.
It wants to hold on.
It wants to turn a dynamic, flowing river into a static block of ice so it can keep it forever. It wants to imprison the moment like a magnet. But Tolle's teachings remind us that true peace isn't found in holding on to the moment.
Right.
True peace is found in allowing the moment to pass entirely without resistance.
Because the present is a flow, not a possession. If you try to imprison the moment, you immediately drop out of the present and back into psychological time.
You become afraid of losing the moment, which ruins the very peace you're desperately trying to hold on to in the first place.
Is the great irony of modern life. We finally noticed the beautiful sunset that David missed, and instead of just observing it in pure silence, our first instinct is to scramble for our phones.
Yep, take a picture.
Right, take a picture and apply an opus clip shock hook to it so we can possess it digitally forever.
By trying to capture the moment, we completely abandon it.
We commodify our own presence. Well, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with the hyper-optimized algorithmic data of 2026, where the numbers prove our minds are asleep and require a literal cognitive shock just to pay attention to a short video.
Right.
And we trace that exact same neurological tripwire to Eckhart Tolle's ego-shattering realization at age 29, when his own mind basically short-circuited the illusion of his suffering.
And then we explored the hidden, malicious malware of the pain body and how the simple, quiet act of observation acts as a task manager to shut it down completely.
Yeah. And we learned from David's candle that mindfulness isn't about blinding yourself to the world, but building the fierce inner focus necessary to truly see it.
And finally, through the beautiful imagery of the poem Lamha, we saw the inherent danger of trying to freeze time like a magnet. Learning instead that true spiritual peace requires letting the moment flow without trying to own it.
It is a powerful reminder that the tools we rely on to navigate the world, our analytical minds, our language, our algorithms, are terrible masters, but excellent servants, if we can only learn to step back and observe them.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder long after you finish listening. Consider this. Your mind's primary evolutionary job is to protect you. It executes this job by constantly, exhaustingly scanning the past for mistakes to avoid and endlessly scanning the future for threats to prepare for.
It's always working.
It is a tireless, completely overworked employee. But if true peace requires you to step entirely outside of psychological time, could it be that finding that peace requires you to make your own brain temporarily unemployed?
That's a great way to look at it.
What would actually happen if, just for the next 60 seconds after this deep dive ends, you gave your mind absolute permission to clock out? No predicting the rest of your day, no regretting yesterday, no problem solving. Just 60 seconds of noticing your breath or the silence in the room without naming any of it. Can you handle 60 seconds of being completely unapologetically unemployed? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious and stay present.